It isn't often that leaders of advanced countries, a G7 country, actually drop a nuclear bomb on a relationship. Only Trudeau knows what credible allegations are. For example, I could say that it's a credible allegation that Trudeau is a complete idiot. It's almost like a mafia which is now running the Canadian government. And Trudeau is playing puppet in the hands of this mafia, which is run by Khalistani gangsters. Canada is now becoming a kind of a gangland central. It isn't often that leaders of advanced countries, a G7 country, actually drop a nuclear bomb on a relationship which is quite important even for them as well as for their allies. But the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has done exactly that in terms of the bilateral relationship between Canada and India. Without a shred of evidence that he has produced in the public domain, he was cavalier enough to stand up in Parliament, in the Canadian Parliament, and accuse India, again, without any evidence, only on the basis of what he called, quote-unquote, credible allegations. Only Trudeau knows what credible allegations are. For example, I could say that it's a credible allegation that Trudeau is a complete idiot. And there would be many people, it is an allegation of course, but many people will find it credible. So on the basis of a credible allegation, he talks about a potential link. The sheer ambiguity in the accusation, however, did not prevent a lot of kite flying around the world, because the message which went across was that India had carried out an assassination in Canada of a Khalistani terrorist. Clearly, relations between India and Canada were going to go south after that. The Indians reacted with fury. They debunked the accusations which were hurled from the Canadian side. A very strong statement was initially issued calling these allegations absurd. And later on, the government of India also issued a travel advisory, which probably would have been reserved normally for countries like Pakistan. But when an Indian government very clearly and in unambiguous terms accuses Canada of politically condoning hate crimes and sponsoring, criminal activities, then it is a very serious affair. Now, India has also suspended all visas to Canadians. Visa facilities have been shut down for the foreseeable future, and relations are going steadily going downhill. The thing is that Trudeau has tried to walk back a little by saying that he does not want to escalate, but now escalation is not in his hands, because I don't think India is ready to let go of this kind of reputational damage, which a dynast and somebody who's in deep political trouble in Canada has tried, to hurl and inflict on India. Clearly, people who are even slightly aware of Canadian politics know that Trudeau's ratings have been falling. The Canadian economy is in deep trouble. There is a lot of evidence of, in fact, the Trudeau government itself has said that inflation is reaching new heights. Grocery prices have become unaffordable for normal, ordinary Canadians. Housing has become extremely unaffordable. and it's an economy which is in a bit of a tailspin. And this was the time when Trudeau's opponents were going to target him on something as fundamental as economic well-being of Canadians. So clearly, Trudeau has latched on to a gangland killing in Canada to target India and deflect attention from his own political troubles. The problem, however, is India is not taking this lying down. India is going to pay back Trudeau and his regime in equal measure, perhaps in more. For a very simple reason that Trudeau and his cabal in Canada have actually been pandering and sponsoring and pampering these terrorists, these gangsters. It's almost like a mafia which is now running the Canadian government, and Trudeau is playing puppet in the hands of this mafia, which is run by Khalistani gangsters, and who have another politician in the name of Jagmeet Singh, who seems to be holding Trudeau by the unmentionables and getting him to do whatever he wants him to do. Trudeau himself has been extremely soft, like his father was before him, on the Khalistani terrorists. He makes it out to be a human rights issue, as though the human rights of all those people that these Khalistanis have butchered and massacred in India is of no consequence. Canada has now become a safe haven, not just for Khalistani terrorists, but for terrorists of many different hues. The Hamas has a base in Canada, the Hezbollah has a base in Canada. There are all kinds of other despicable elements who have taken refuge in Canada and who have been protected by the Canadian authorities. And as someone said on Indian television the other day, Professor Anand Ranganathan, that even if Osama bin Laden had taken refuge in Canada, perhaps he would have still been alive today because of the kind of impunity that terrorists seem to enjoy in a country like Canada, which is extremely unfortunate because normally Canadians are extremely decent people. Canada is a very nice country to be in. Many people who have been in Canada swear by the people, their politeness, their niceness. And I think it's extremely unfortunate that a country like Canada has inflicted upon itself somebody like Trudeau and his bunch of friends, entitled characters without any achievements, only their dynasties to which they belong, and the wealth which their parents have left for them. None of them is really a self-made man. It is extremely important to understand where India is coming from. India has been insisting with the Canadians and has been impressing upon the Canadian authorities of the need to curb some of the egregious activities of the Khalistani mobs. Now, frankly, if these guys were simply involved in only demonstrating or protesting, I think India would have simply ignored it and moved on like we've done for many years. The problem, however, is that Canada is now becoming a kind of a gangland central. As far as India is concerned, these Khalistani gangsters who have been given refuge and protection by Canadian authorities, by ministers who have allegedly, while they were in the police service or involved in law and order, turned a blind eye and allowed these mafias to become bigger than what they should have been, and have profited politically from their support. These kind of people have allowed these gangsters to make Canada a place from where, quite like Dawood Ibrahim used to do, in the decades past, in the 90s, 80s and 90s, he would sit first in Dubai and then later on in his sanctuary in Pakistan and order gangland killings and run his gang in India from his safe haven in Pakistan. Canada has become a safe haven for Khalistani gangsters who are involved in drug running in Punjab, who are involved in gun running, who are involved in human trafficking, who are involved in all sorts of other nefarious activity. So clearly, this is a huge problem for India, and India has been trying to impress upon the Canadians to curb the activities of these guys. It is also important, like I said earlier, that if it was merely some people protesting, demonstrating, it was water off a duck's back as far as India is concerned. The problem with a lot of this Khalistani element is that not only are they actually carrying out criminal activity in India, which the so-called famed Canadian intelligence and security services are either clueless of or have simply turned a blind eye to the activities of these thugs who are in Canada. But these thugs also have a track record of terrorism. They have been involved in terrorist activities, including the Air India bombing in the 1980s, which the Canadians, with their famed Five Eyes, which they are swearing by, with the famed investigation skills that they are swearing by, literally they blew apart that entire investigation and did not really convict the main people involved. And even the people who were convicted were later on released when Trudeau came into power. So he has been pandering to these guys, and for the Canadians to say that India, or to allege rather, like their national security advisor to Trudeau had done some months back, that India was one of the countries seen to be interfering in Canadian affairs. It's rather rich coming from the Canadians, because not only are there criminal activities being carried out by people sitting in Canada and India, these are also people who have been trying to interfere and insert themselves in Indian politics by funding political activity, political agitation in India. If that is not interference, then what is? So clearly this is a huge problem. And I don't think the government of India is in any mood to back down just yet. I think the Canadians will have to walk back. Otherwise, all bets are off as far as this relationship is concerned. Now, this again, I'll insist, this is very unfortunate because Canada is, apart from, if you remove Trudeau from the equation, has been a friendly country, notwithstanding his father before him. But by and large, Canada has been a very welcoming country. It's been a friendly country. It's been a country with which we have a lot going. There are over 250,000 Indian students who are in Canadian universities, and the amount of monies they spend on their education in Canada runs into billions of dollars. There is a very profitable trade relationship, which incidentally was supposed to grow even more, but the current spat seems to have killed the possibility of any kind of a trade deal between India and Canada. And then, of course, there is a very important security and strategic relationship which India and Canada should ideally be sharing, given the challenges that both face from countries like China. And the entire Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States, and to some extent even of Canada, hinges very critically on India. And yet, Trudeau, for whatever reason, has decided to blow apart this relationship simply because it suited his politics, simply because he wanted to do some grandstanding, or perhaps he felt that his fragile little ego was hurt because he was kind of ignored, not only during the G20 summit. He was literally, it was kind of hissy, if I might use that term, while he was out here. He was virtually ignored. He did not get any real attention. And the meeting between him and the Prime Minister, which did not last for very long and which was literally a kind of a pull aside, led to statements being issued from both countries, which did point that the relationship is going south. Even earlier, when Trudeau had come in 2018, there was a huge controversy over that visit because of his hobnobbing with this Khalistani terrorist element. And it's pretty clear that India is no longer willing to, have a kind of a blind eye kind of an approach that, okay, fine, we'll look away while you flirt with these subversive elements, these terrorist elements. For the Canadians and some of their allies, I can understand that they have to make some pro forma statements expressing solidarity with Canada. But it's rather rich coming from some of these Western countries when they talk about, even if for the sake of argument one accepts that the killing of this fellow Hardeep Nijjar was done by somebody who was potentially linked, as the Canadians call it, to India or the Indian government or the Indian intelligence agencies. Is India the only country which would be carrying out operations like this? Don't the Americans do it? Or is it that the Western countries, the white West, can carry out these operations in Iran, in Iraq, in some parts of Africa, in some parts of, even in some European countries, but heavens will fall if somebody else carries out a similar operation in their countries? I don't think this is something which works just in one way. This is a two-way street, and frankly speaking, if the Western world wants to have a reasonable and profitable security relationship with a country like India, it has to care for India's security interests. You cannot be sabotaging India from within by using these terrorist elements or allowing them to operate with impunity, and then expect that India will lay itself out for you on other strategic matters which relate to relations outside India. I think India's security is indivisible whether it is outside India or inside India. And Western countries need to wake up, smell the coffee, that if you think that you can sponsor, you can flirt with, you can give impunity to terrorist elements in India and still expect that India will play ball with you, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. And I think this is a kind of a wake-up call for all these countries. And Canada, of course, is the worst example of what has happened. But it is not as though some of the other Anglo-Saxon countries, Britain has been very problematic. There have been attacks on Indian missions, for example, in the United States. But the US seems to have now assured us that they will ensure that nothing untoward happens. It's happened in Australia, but in Canada it's been the worst. Despite constant representations to the Canadian authorities that, look, Indian diplomats have been threatened, Indian diplomats have been intimidated, open threats of genocide have been issued by these Khalistani terrorists, and yet Trudeau is brave enough or stupid enough to say this is freedom of speech. I'm sorry, this is not freedom of speech. This is hate speech. And as the Indian statement says, that there is a political condoning of hate speech by Canadian government at the very highest levels. They have defiled Hindu temples, they have attacked Indian missions, and what have the Canadians done? Damn all. So clearly, if this relationship has to come back on track, if things have to improve between India and Canada, then the Canadians need to start acting on legitimate concerns of India on the activities of these terrorists and these gangsters. And there is a nexus between terrorism and these gangsters who are based in Canada. Until and unless the Canadians now start moving on this issue and curb their activities, I'm afraid all bets are off as far as India-Canada relations are concerned.